That time I got reincarnated as a slime represents to me something like the platonic ideal of anime. That is to say, if you asked me to picture the most quintessentially anime series imaginable, this is probably what would spring to mind. Perhaps because I got into the medium in the early 2000s, when a bulk of what was getting released stateside were fantasy action and adventure shows with big, colorful casts and plenty of fan service. Not to say that these have become rare or don't represent a sizable chunk of the medium on the whole, but it's less a matter of how many shows like this exist as it is a matter of how popular they've always been, particularly with teenage boys like the one that I was when I got into the medium. As such, the show gives me a nostalgic feeling, not just because it happens to remind me of the stuff I grew up on, but also for the occasional reference to games and manga even older than I am. Be they Dragon Quest, from which the basic premise of this and nearly every other isekai world is derived, or classic manga like Ah My Goddess and 5-Star Stories, the proclivities of the 37-year-old protagonist speak to a likely older author just as eager to recreate the structure and attitude of the shows from his youth as the trends of modern isekai light novels. Perhaps the most contentious aspect of Tensura's construction is the relative lack of narrative urgency or stakes across its first season. Much of the story consists of continual build-up, as arc after arc new characters are introduced, at first in conflict with the protagonists, are easily conquered and reformed, and then are added to the ever-growing stable of allies needed to, assumably, take on bigger and bigger threats as we go along. This might sound weird, but it's almost analogous to the second and third Mass Effect games, with Rimuru Tempest filling the role of Commander Shepard, gathering and growing closer and closer to an increasingly loyal and trusting crew, also they can head into the suicidal final battle as prepared as possible, likely losing a lot of allies in the process. So what exactly is the theme of this series? In a way, diplomacy. After a nearly middle-aged otaku businessman gets stabbed to death saving one of his juniors, he respawns in a fantasy world as a very special slime with a unique set of overpowered abilities that allow him to level rapidly and soon take an extremely powerful dragon into his body, instantly making him one of the strongest creatures in the world. From this position of power, he then sets about befriending and reforming everyone he meets in a somewhat casual manner, just kinda because he can. Since might makes right in the world of monsters, and since he's at once the mightiest, kindest, and most intelligent monster around, this means that it takes no time at all for him to unite tribe after tribe of traditional video game enemies into a federation powerful enough to form alliances with the world's existing major societies. So basically, it's a standard wish fulfillment fantasy about a regular-ass guy solving everyone's problems just by simply being stronger and smarter than everyone else, as these isekai stories tend to be. But more interesting to me than the facts of stories like these are the operating theories behind them. For instance, you could accuse Log Horizon just as easily of using the same kind of setup for its backbone, but if that show had a point, so to speak, it was to explore how a society could be made to function well through clever, and of course lucky, adherence to the principles of a capitalistic libertarian society. It's built around a world which allows for an idealized version of this social structure to function, and then is dedicated to resolving whatever conflicts might arise in trying to establish and grow such a society. In the case of Slime, it's quite the opposite. Rimuru Tempest holds absolute authority over his kingdom, and if anything would be characterized as a benevolent dictator. Essentially all he does is overwhelm his enemies with sheer force, then kindly allow them a place in his society which suits their strengths and will make them happy to work with him. Again, the world is structured in a way to allow this, particularly because, both metaphorically and literally, his constituency largely consists of NPCs. Monsters are not individualistic, nor do they desire more than to have their basic needs met and to fulfill some kind of function in society where they can be useful. Personal desire and aspiration hardly even crosses their minds. The only ones who could be seen as player characters, so to speak, are the sociopathic demon lords and rulers of other nations, with whom Rimuru has to negotiate and ally on more traditional terms. This is never made difficult by the show, granted, since issues like competition of resources or differing cultural ideologies are pretty much not even brought up, and trade agreements are easily reached when Rimuru is always willing to take the downside of an uneven deal to placate whomever he's dealing with, given that his power and time are basically unlimited and dedicated to no other purpose but propagating his federation. It is for this reason that Slime Isekai, as I like to call it, isn't nearly as interesting as Log Horizon, as everything is resolved too easily and with too little analog to reality. reality. Nevertheless, there is something very charming to me about the sheer amiability of Slime's cast. Basically everyone turns into a lovable do-gooder as soon as they know how they can fit into Rimuru's society, and Rimuru has basically no real interest in doing anything but making as much right for as many people as possible. So it's easy to imagine that if such a ruler really existed in a world wherein society was much less complex, they really would be the most beloved king in history, and one immune to assassination or deposition because he's a ridiculously powerful slime. Nevertheless, if it had to rely on the script alone, I probably wouldn't have watched this first season all the way to the end. After all, the manga, which I found to be perfectly adequate, I dropped after the first volume just for lacking enough to distinguish it from its contemporaries. The anime series, however, is significantly bolstered by fantastic artwork in both its characters and backgrounds, consistently inventive visual compositions and even shifts in medium, tons of impressive and expressive animation, and one of the genre's most inviting color palettes. Contrary to popular belief, I do love me some dumb fun, just as long as there's not any overly questionable bullshit in the narrative and as long as the presentation is legitimately exciting. Slime Isekai is frequently delightful enough just to look at that I'd hardly even need it to have dialogue to enjoy watching it. What is there narratively is pretty bare bones, and in the second half it does start to frustrate with just how little progress is made towards any kind of greater overarching story or meaningful drama. But with readers of the original assuring me that things are going to get seriously intense in the already announced second season, I'm ready to strap in for the long haul and see what's in store for this lovable cast of humanoid monsters and just how far the crazy-ass power creep is going to escalate by the end. If the basic premise of this show doesn't appeal to you, or you're sick of this kind of series already, then you should probably pass on Slime Isekai. It isn't going to change your opinion of the genre or tell a story you've never heard before, even if it might show you a few unexpectedly new visual tricks. Still, if you're generally into fantasy action and adventure and like the way this show looks, then you'll have an easy time shoveling it down like salted popcorn. Now go watch my goddamn gaming channel, my crazy as shit vlogs, and all the other stuff I do on YouTube using this playlist of over 3,000 videos that I'm featured in, and support me on Patreon if you want access to a robust set of bonus content rewards, such as giving me $15 to rant about whatever the hell you want. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.